Hey everybody, Bearded Rogue here. So today I wanted to talk to you about the results of my playtesting from Dragonflight. I wanted this to be a totally separate video, both because I wanted to kind of talk about Dragonflight as a con in the other video. You can look earlier in my Vlogust playlist if you want to see that. But also because I wanted to kind of take a look at my personal design weaknesses, strengths, ethos, and some of the challenges and successes that I've had recently. And I felt that that would both make that Dragonflight video too long and would be more interesting to a different group of people, namely other designers or people who are interested specifically in my designs. I've been told that there are some of you out there. I have 3 games that I brought with me to Dragonflight that are in various stages of doneness. Several of them I knew were going to have issues when I brought them to the table, which is why I playtest. Even a game that is unfinished, and I think this is something that is very important when it comes to playtesting. Even a game that is unfinished can give you information by playing it. Whether that's you're in the very initial early stages and you don't even know what the components are for the game and you're just playing around with a few cards and tokens or whatever, or you have a game that you've spent some time on creating and you don't know the end game trigger. You don't know when the game is going to end or why it will end. There's all sorts of reasons why this is a thing, and why it's important to kind of keep that in mind, but you don't have to have a finished game to put it on the table. That's a very important thing that I think a lot of beginning designers miss, or that a lot of designers who are very into their creations get kind of too wrapped up in is, I've got to have the full thing, I've got to have everything. You really don't. You don't even have to have all of the cards that you intend on having in the final game. You just have to have enough to play and observe. So I had one game that I knew was going to crash and burn. I deliberately ripped out a subsystem from it earlier in the week because I wanted to see how essential this subsystem was to gameplay. So the game in particular is Warm Fuzzy Tribe. Warm Fuzzy Tribe basically had 2 sets of cards. The cards that you played with, and then the cards that you scored with. So the cards that you played with, you basically took your cards, and you played them to a grid, and then you compared them to the other cards that were in the same row or column, and then you earned resources based on what was in the row or column that did not match either of the items. So if I played this kitty cat here with this blue next to this monkey with green, I would get 2 blue because I played a blue card and neither of the icons on this match the icons of the card I played. If I were to, however, play this green monkey next to this green panda, I would only get 1 green because the greens match even though the animals are different. So that's basically how resources are earned in the game. I'm trying to design games that are as streamlined and simple as possible these days. I have a habit of over-designing. I have a habit of creating a lot of cognitive overload in people. And this is something that I really wanted to try to limit in current designs. I want to design more elegant, simpler games in order to see if I can, and in order to become a better designer. So Warm Fuzzy's Tribe, I wanted to design a game that would be playable with families or younger kids. The main mechanism of playing cards to a grid and gaining resources for not matching isn't as intuitive as I'd hoped. I'm going for basically the animals all want to be friends and they prize diversity, which is something that I want to see more of in the world, and that's kind of where it comes from. So it's important to me that that is part of the game. Like, part of the theme of Warm Fuzzy's tribe is basically chosen family, diversity is rewarded, that sort of thing. The other piece of the game that existed prior to this weekend is the goal cards, which are also animals. And they have two costs, one cheaper cost, one more expensive cost, and you'll notice they're different colors. So you can get them, or you can pay for them using one resource or the other resource. One is just a little bit more expensive than the other. And then you would add these to your circle of friends. At that point, they would basically just be face down. You would add them to your circle of friends, and then at the end of the game, you would score based on diversity. So every set that you score, you want to have as many different kinds of animals as possible. So if I had a set that had a panda, a kitty, a puppy, and a bunny, that would be really good. If I added a monkey, that would be even better. There are only 5 animal types. So if I had one of each animal, that was the ideal set, and I would score basically 15 points. So I want to have as diverse a group of animals as possible. Duplicates are less good in that regard. Now, over the course of the game, you would be making multiple sets, but you'd want as few repeats as possible, because repeats are effectively another set. So a single animal by itself is just 1 point, 2 animals are 3 points, 3 animals are 6 points. Using triangular numbers, 4 animals are 10 points. You get the picture. 5 animals are 15 points, 5 is the most that you can score. So that was the original idea, and these would basically be in a market of cards that people could purchase, and as you purchase them, they would be replaced. I originally had a sliding market. That did not work in testing, and so I decided to give them each individual costs. So I started wondering, you know, the deck of cards that you play with is this big. The deck of scorecards is this big. It's larger than the deck of cards that you play with. Could I strip this out? Could I make it so that you're instead just scoring diversity of these, and instead give the critters special abilities that let them manipulate the grid in a way? So I wanted to see if this was doable. The quick answer is, it might be, but not like this. We played the game, and while the playing cards to a grid to earn resources part functions, like it works, you quickly are left with way too many resources, like absolute truckloads of resources. In addition, the cards that you get in hand greatly determine which resources you can claim. And if you are looking for a diversity of resources, then you can get completely hosed by the deck. If you never get a card with red on it, you never acquire red resources, which greatly diminishes your score. A market of cards that you purchase, however, especially if they both have 2 costs, if they all have 2 costs, means that most of your resources will be useful, even if you're paying a little bit more than somebody else would be. It acts as a resource sink. You are losing resources as you pay them back to the bank to acquire these scoring condition cards. Will these be enough resources? Maybe, maybe not. I may need to tweak those numbers. However, what I basically found with my test is that something like this is absolutely necessary for this game. Now, special abilities for the animals that let you manipulate the grid. Are those necessary for the game? Probably not. What I discovered is, yet again, cognitive load-wise, there is a lot of information on the table in rows and columns of cards, even if the rows and columns only go up to a 5x5 grid or back down to a 4x4 grid, as originally stated. The nature of that is such that the 4x4 grid offers a lot of places for you to play these cards. And where you play them has a direct impact on how many resources you acquire. So, if you've ever seen newer players playing Carcassonne and trying to figure out how many points the tile they're about to place will earn them anywhere on the board that it is viable for them to place it, you will kind of understand the cognitive load that is going on in a game where you have a hand of cards, and you are looking at all of them trying to evaluate which one you should play where to get the most resources. Adding special abilities to that, in this case, abilities that let you manipulate the grid that you're playing into, while allowing for people to feel more clever if they can process it, adds that if they can process it to the equation. This makes it less of a sure thing, and actually makes the game more complicated, rather than less complicated. Even though it's fewer components, even though it's one set of cards, the special abilities adding to the already existing placement rules, which are less intuitive, because you are only collecting resources for differences rather than matching, is too much. I think it's too much for the weight of game that I am specifically going for certain. Maybe too much just in general to ask of players that aren't looking for something much more crunchy than the theme of Warm Fuzzies suggests. Now, this is the prototype, and I'm only using placeholder art of the cute little animals. In the more final version of the game, I would prefer to use monsters. I want to use silly monsters. A couple of reasons for that. One, I can differentiate them more in appearance on the table. Number two, that's the original inspiration of the game idea. Is a bunch of monsters who are very diverse and different, welcoming everybody into the fold. That's kind of the theme that I want to go with. These were just the first icons I could find that were cute and that managed to feel like they belonged to a set with each other, because they do. That is somewhat to their detriment, because as you can see, the kitty and the rabbit are only different by their ears. That's their only significant difference. The puppy is also the same shape, but again, his ears and the spot over his eye are his only differences. The panda has 2 spots over his eyes, and his body is dark. The monkey is completely dark, but that's basically it as far as his differences. So they look very similar. From my plays of other games that involve playing lots of things, you want the icons to be distinct. Specifically my beat-em-up game, which is a real-time game, you need the icons to be distinct from each other so that it's very clear what is there in front of you. All of the animals looking so similar actually makes it harder to process when you're looking for differences specifically, which is the point of the game. So I may need to change out the animal icons that I'm using for a more differentiated set of icons. Maybe I can find a set of monsters that are very distinct, a set of 5 monsters that are distinct enough in shape, and or I can incorporate color even though I don't want to confuse it with the other colors in the game. Incorporating color might be a good idea to further differentiate the different monster types. But I learned all of that from a single playtest. Putting it on the table and having players interact with it and seeing what happened and seeing what frustrates them and seeing what works for them, and seeing how many resources accumulate, seeing how difficult it is for people to find placements, or if they feel like they're playing suboptimally, or if it frustrates them. All of this is stuff that I can observe as they're playing, and a single playtest is enough to see all of that. This game is still in its early stages. Like, it hasn't completely decided what it wants to be yet. It hasn't completely decided on its endgame strategy. Right now, the endgame is basically you play a 4x4 grid for each player, where each player starts with the first card in that 4x4 grid. So, you know, that's a, you know, that may or may not be the correct end game trigger. I don't know. It's just a good point to stop at, because it is symmetrical and gives everybody a first turn, basically, where they're playing a card to an empty field, as it were. You know, that said, there are a lot of other suggestions that came up that are pretty interesting. You know, what if it is a fixed 4x4 grid instead of an organic 4x4 grid that grows as players play cards? And there are obstacles in the grid that cut off line of sight, so that there are fewer cards for you to look at as far as when you're playing to the grid, to not only make it more interesting placement-wise, but to add to, you know, the reduction of overall resources. If every row or column isn't guaranteed to be 4 long or 4 wide, then perhaps that's a more interesting way to play the game. I don't know yet. I haven't tried it that way, but it's an interesting idea, and I'm going to check it out. And it's a piece of feedback that I wouldn't have gotten had I not put it on the table, had it remained theory craft, or had I been unwilling to put something that I knew was unfinished in front of players to look at. I never would have learned all of this stuff. So that's kind of the lesson of my Warm Fuzzies experience. It was painful. It didn't work. It broke. I figured it would, but seeing how it broke taught me so very much that the next version of the game that I put in front of players is going to be better than the one that I just did. It's going to be a better game, it's going to be a more solid game, and I'm going to be able to incorporate the changes and the lessons that I learned in this one. I know I said that I was going to talk about all of my games in this video, but I think I'm just going to cut this video off at this one, and I'll talk about the other 2 that I playtested in separate videos, so that this one doesn't get too unbearably long. I'll mark this one as Warm Fuzzies playtests, and what I learned, lessons learned, kind of an after-action report. If you'd like to see more videos of this like this from me in the future, let me know. I do an after-action report myself after every playtest to write down all of the notes that I had and read and look at all of the feedback that I receive. In addition, if I'm working on a game with a co-designer like John and Fire in the Library or some of my other games, we will have an after-action report where we discuss how the game felt, what we noticed, what we didn't notice, what the player's feedback was, what that feedback means. Because just because somebody says you should change this doesn't mean you should change that. They may just be pointing at the problem. You know, we can talk about individual playtesting stuff at another time. I think I have in a past video. You know, if you're interested in stuff like this, as far as my design process goes, or after-action reports, or you want to hear the before a playtest, like, I'm going to bring this game to a playtest, here's what I am looking to learn, and then an after-action report after the playtest, I would be more than willing to do videos like that if that's something that you guys would like to hear. So let me know, one way or another. Either way, I'm going to let that be enough for today, and that's it. Later, guys.